Now, we're going to have the phrase or phrases or clause or clauses. Now, what's the difference between phrases and clauses? Okay, let us now understand or have the difference between the two. Every sentence is constructed of clauses or phrases, but sometimes it can be tricky to tell the difference between a phrase and a clause. Both phrases and clauses contain groups of two or more words and help us to make sentences, but they both have different roles. Let us understand the difference between the two. A clause is a group of words that contains a subject and a verb, while a phrase is a group of words but it doesn't contain a subject and a verb. Again, when we say clause, it contains a subject and a verb, while a phrase is a group of words and it does not contain a subject and a verb. A sentence can exist as a single clause, but a single phrase can't make up a sentence. Phrases add meaning to a sentence, but they can't create a sentence on their own. Clauses, on the other hand, are necessary. Removing a clause from a sentence may affect the idea of the sentence or the understanding to that particular sentence. Okay, here is an example of a sentence that uses both a phrase and a clause. For example, wherever you go, I will follow. Wherever you go is the phrase, and I will follow is the clause. Wherever you go doesn't make sense on its own. It's not a completed thought, it's not a complete thought. But I will follow contains both a subject and a verb. I is our subject and follow is our verb. It is a complete thought and we don't need any more words to understand the meaning of the sentence. Okay, along with phrases and clauses, the meaning of a sentence can also be confused. They all work together to create meaning, but identifying the individual components is what make it difficult. An easy way to remember the difference between a phrase and a clause is to remember the building blocks of a sentence. A clause contains phrases and a sentence contains clauses. So, to make a sentence, the building blocks would go in this order. We should first have the phrase. We have the phrase to create a clause. We have the clause to create a sentence. The big block, the big clock chimed, or the big block, the big clock chimed, and the big clock chimed when the hands struck midnight. Okay. A phrase is a group of words that can't stand alone as a sentence. It's a key part of the clause and the overall sentence. It's the subject of it, but it can't make a sense as it is. Things get a little confusing with a main or independent clause. For example, the big clock chimed or chimed is both a clause and a sentence in its own right. It contains a subject and a verb. Now, how are we going to identify a phrase or a clause? The quickest way to identify whether a group of words is a phrase or a clause is to look for both a subject and a verb. If you can find both, then it is a clause. If you can only find one or the other, then it's a phrase. Here's an example to analyze. White and raspberry chocolate is delicious. The whole sentence itself is a clause, a main clause to be exact. But a part of the clause is a phrase. White and raspberry chocolate doesn't contain a verb. It just has the subject. That means it's a phrase. However, there are many types of phrases and clauses. Now, let us have the different types of phrases and clauses. First, let us have the noun phrase. When we say noun phrase, it functions just like a noun in a sentence. It includes the noun and adjectives to describe the noun. For example, The pretty little flowers are blossoming in my garden. That is a verb phrase. While, no, I'm sorry, that is a noun phrase. Next is we have a verb phrase. A verb phrase contains a verb and its modifiers, just like a noun phrase. For example, I have been working non-stop today. Next, we have the gerund phrase. A gerund phrase uses an ing verb as a noun. To put it simply, a gerund phrase is the same as a noun phrase, except you use the gerund instead of the noun. For example, I love swimming in the ocean. Next is we have the participial phrase. When we say participial phrase, it works in a similar way to a gerund. It uses a verb in a different way, just as gerund uses a noun. It begins with a participle, a verb used as an adjective and its modifiers. For example, bracing herself for the jump. She took a deep breath. Next, infinitive phrase. When we say infinitive phrase, an infinitive phrase starts with the infinitive or the linking verb to. For example, I want to go to the cinema later. Or to understand phrases versus clauses, you should read this sentence or you should watch this video. Next, we have the appositive phrase. Appositive helps you to clarify which noun you are talking about. An appositive phrase is basically an appositive, but with more than one word. They help to add more detail to the noun. For example, my dinner tonight, a spicy vegetable curry, is going to be delicious. And next, we have the prepositional phrase. Prepositions help us to describe the position of a noun or a pronoun. A prepositional phrase includes the preposition as well as the words that follow. For example, the new bookshop is going to be opening near my house. And that's it. Those are the types of phrases. Now, let us have the types of clauses. First, we have the independent clause or the main clause. When we say independent clause, it is a complete sentence. It's a complete thought that makes sense on its own. It can also be called a main clause because it makes up the main part of a sentence. For example, I love chocolate chip cookies. And next, let us have the dependent clause, wherein dependent clauses are often the reason why phrases and clauses gets confused. Okay, under dependent clause, let us first have the relative clause. When we say a relative clause, it begins with the relative pronoun who, whom, whose, which, that. For example, he knew instantly whose voice had called out to him. Next, let us have the noun clause. A noun clause acts like a noun within a sentence. Unlike a pronoun phrase, it includes a subject and a verb. For example, she was deeply moved by what she had watched. Another type of a clause is the adjective clause. An adjective clause acts like an adjective. It describes a noun by using a subject and a verb. For example, the dress that you bought for me fits perfectly. Next, let us have the adverbial clause. An adverbial clause modifies the verb in a sentence and acts like an adverb. They always start with a subordinating conjunction. For example, I walk my dog until she gets tired. Okay, so those are the types of phrases and clauses.